You're listening to How I Made It, the Streamline podcast. For musicians, podcasters, video makers, graphic designers, and more, Streamline is the collaboration platform to build your creative future. We turn chaos into creativity. Check us out at www.streamline-media.net. Welcome to the very first episode of How I Made It, the Streamline podcast. This is a series focused on creatives, how they did it, how they got to be where they were, and just what they're thinking these days. Our first guest is Eric Liljestrand, who's a guitarist, a producer, and engineer based in Los Angeles. He began his career in the downtown art music scene in the early 1980s, engineering, playing guitar, and programming for people like Peter Gordon, David Van Tieghem, Arthur Russell, Laurie Anderson, and Diamanda Galas. Unlike many of his peers, Eric branched out into live sound, theater sound design, film scoring, sound effects, and composition. A long and fruitful collaboration with Hal Willner yielded films by Robert Altman and Martin Scorcese, as well as a season of Saturday Night Live. His credits include a Grammy win for Bill Frisell's Unspeakable, producing Lucinda Williams' top 10 Little Honey, engineering Keith Urban's #1 album Fuse, and a wealth of albums and film scores. I first met Eric at the Kitchen when he was working with Diamanda Galas on the performances of Vina Cava, and we continued to work on a number of Diamanda's performances and other things. And I actually bought Blue Jean Tyranny's old TIAC 3340 4-track tape deck from him. And we'll dive right into today's podcast. And you've had a very broad career, so touch on that. So let's start when you're young and how you got to where you are now.
All right. Well, let's see. Grandma got me a guitar at age 9. Nobody got me lessons. It sat in the closet until I was 14. Around 14, I started picking out bass lines on the lowest string and realized, I had actually a kind of ear. I'd played trumpet for a little while, and I had a good ear. So finally, I got some lessons, and that launched me. And of course, I had the typical experience with my parents where, that's not a job. Find a real job. That's a nice hobby. Very nice. And I looked around, and although I had started recording some things with friends and on my own, and I had a tape recorder, it was really a Jade Warrior album called Floating World that kicked me off, because here was a record that was largely two guys overdubbed, as big as an orchestra. And in a way, they invented New Age, but it was New Age with teeth, because it would challenge you and it would get really raucous and rocking at times. And there's a moment on it where they did the Balinese monkey chant with kind of a hippie, Hendrixy guitar solo over it.
All right.
And, it's pretty great. Look it up. And there was a delay between the guitar was in one channel and the delayed guitar was in the other channel. And I knew immediately what it was. And I thought, wait, somebody had to do that. And I thought, I could be that guy. Because then I'll always work. I don't have to be popular. I just have to be good. It's not like a rock star dream. And
that's pretty insightful at a young age.
At that age, I was probably 16 by the time that happened. But so I started pursuing it, and I went to Syracuse University and studied radio and TV, because that's how you got into their state-of-the-art recording studio. And I hated television, and I flunked my major, but I had an electronic music class with a very large modular Moog taught by a guy named Franklin Morse, I think. And then a bunch of non-major music classes. And again, I discovered, hey, I can do 4-voice counterpoint. We started with species counterpoint, note against note, and then got up to like chorales, like Bach. And then I said, well, if I'm doing music, what am I doing in Syracuse? And I transferred to NYU, and I was already commuting down to play at CBGBs and bands and things, and transferred to NYU, who had one of the few programs in music and recording technology at the time. And then I kind of detoured. I worked for Rolling Stone magazine for several years.
What did you do for Rolling Stone?
Well, I started out, at that time, which this would be the 1980, 81, 82 into 83. If you saw the Rolling Stone magazine in a music store, musical instrument store, not a record store, chances are I called them and put it there.
Okay.
And it was just a freelance phone sales position. And I ignored their script and I just said, look, try it. If it doesn't work, cancel it. Who cares? And everybody tried it. So I made a bunch of money. And of course, a lot of them failed because there would be multiple stores within a couple of miles of each other. We carpet bombed the country. And then I said to them, well, a lot of these people aren't paying you, so why don't you have me call them back and collect? And I ended up in the finance department of all things. And I'm terrible with money. I'm terrible with numbers. And eventually, thank goodness, I got fired. And I spent about 6 months playing in a band and not much else. And then I called a friend of a friend whose brother owned a recording studio, and that was Battery Sound, block south of the World Trade Center. And I did a session the night I interviewed.
Oh, that's nice. Do you remember who the session was with?
I absolutely do. It was a guy named James Mason, who was quite on the scene as kind of a mentor, producer, teacher. And we did the WBLS rap contest winners keyboard overdubs.
Okay.
And he brought his whatever keyboard he had and his wife and, tiny baby who was probably 40 by now. And we did I was literally just dropped into it, and I couldn't even find the switch to turn on the big switch from the small speakers to the big speakers. I had no idea. So here I was with a client with a Harrison console, maybe 6 hours after I interviewed.
All right. Well, so far this is a series of pretty good starts to things here.
Yeah. So I was really only an assistant engineer when somebody brought an engineer, and otherwise I was the head engineer from day one. And I would come in and the owner would do his own music through the night, and I would come in and clean up after him and vacuum and make the coffee and do the session, and then have a beer with him and go home. And through that, I met some people that were really important to me. Peter Gordon, who had the Love of Life Orchestra. At the time, David Van Tieghem was part of that band, and they later split off, and I worked with both of them. Arthur Russell, who would think that this really fringy guy would be such a singular person in history, but there have now been 3 books written about him and all this stuff. I spent every full moon with Arthur all night in the studio for 3 years.
I remember hearing about the full moon sessions. I didn't know it was you.
It was just, and he was so important for me to become fast and good, because he had a 2-track machine at home. So the goal was to make a lot of mixes while we worked. So I would probably have 3 2-tracks running while we were multi-tracking. And I would be doing a mix off the stereo Q send on the console and a mix off the faders while tracking him onto the multi-track. And and crazy stuff like record on 17, track 17, but you have to shut that off at 3 minutes and 20 seconds and switch over to track 13, because otherwise you'll erase my solo. And all this, on no sleep, it's 4 a.m.
All right.
You find strategies to get through this stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to dive in a little deeper on this, basically, because There are people who are going to hear this who have no idea how difficult something like that is in the analog days.
Yeah.
So talk a bit about that. Talk about trying to do something like that with non-automated consoles, with, going down to analog tape,
Yeah, and
limited numbers of tracks.
Anything you erase goes back to the power company. I mean, it's gone forever. First off, there's the whole, alignment procedure and machine maintenance, cleaning, demagging. You have 24 tracks on down to align and make sure the response is good. Everybody comes in with a tape that might have come from some other studio. If I'm lucky, I started the project, so I kind of know if I keep the machine aligned, I'm going to be really close when I start, so it's not going to take me too long. There's no second chances if you're punching in and out, especially punching out. Punching in, sorry, I missed it. Punching out, that's a bigger issue because you could erase something that they really want. And of course, whatever you erase is the most important thing in their life at that moment, and justifiably so. So you get, it requires a lot of focus and a lot of confidence. And, there's also, you end up doing what they used to call burning a hole in the tape, meaning if you keep punching in the same spot, the spot you're punching gets wider and wider and wider because you're a human, you cannot go in exactly at that moment. And machines, there were some machines that had auto punch in at that time, totally untrustworthy. It's off the tachometer on the tension reel.
Yeah.
No. You'd have to have so much space to use that. So you end up punching in. So, you just have to get it, and you have to keep getting it, get as close as you can. And then you're dealing, in this case with Arthur, if I'm doing 2 or possibly 3 mixes, plus our monitor mix that we're hearing, and multi-tracking, I'm dealing with at least 3 transports. So hopefully they all have remote controls, because otherwise I have to, be doing this, jumping around.
Yeah, and you have to be familiar with each machine and its responsiveness. I think that too. And I still have it. I bought that 3340 from you.
That's who bought it. Thank you. I forgot it was you. I was telling the story earlier.
I still have it. I haven't used it in years and years and years. But
that is the best work ever.
Yeah, but it had its own behavior. You knew, press, and then it goes, and you get a sense for
slow,
that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really slow. It was a huge change in my life decades later when Quick Punch on Pro Tools came in, and it didn't really matter if you got it because you could always just drag it back, and it was recording from where you played from, which it was mind blowing at the time. Now it's just common.
Oh yeah, and the ability to put handles at each end. So
yes, yeah.
So
you can correct things and fade things, and we also had to spot erase because sometimes you would end up with a little in between the punch, some artifact that was left over from an earlier take, and you would have to, as if you were going to splice it, you would have to mark the tape with a China marker at your in and out, and then hand roll it holding the record button to erase this little thing. Again, has all this stress. You've got to be really freaking careful.
Did you ever cut windows?
Yes, only once. And thank God, only once. But yeah, and I actually I came in for a session at another studio, and the guy had been up all night cutting the hi-hat out of a mix.
Oh my God.
And he showed me the tape, and it was, he had just these little squares cut out every 8th note of the thing, and you kind of couldn't hear it. It was kind of amazing. There was still a little something there, but
no,
it was a very different environment. And, of course, we would do multiple takes. There's no like auto tune or, elastic time correction, whatever. So we still had plenty of tools. We would do multiple takes and comp things on another track and so forth. But it put a lot of weight on both the engineer and the performer, because you just have to freaking get it. Yeah. Even if you only get it that one time, you have to get it. And occasionally we would do some tuning tricks with a harmonizer where we'd find something there was just a note. Everything else is great, but this one note, and we would go through and even tied harmonizer in hardware and just in the comp punch in that one note tuned up. But that was the rare case. Usually you just tried to nail it. And really, in the world I was in when I started, it was about the performance, not about perfection at all.
Right.
So that wasn't really the issue. It was more about them trying to get their soul onto the tape than anything else.
Yeah. So, and I mean, well, to get to that as well, because you've worked now in that environment and now the current sort of infinite track, infinite redo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And before we get into sort of what it's like to work as an engineer and producer in that, how do you feel that has affected performers?
Oh, well, that depends on the performer.
Okay.
I've had plenty of people. First off, I'd like to dispel the myth that anybody makes it without talent, because that's just ridiculous. The people on top are really, really good.
Yeah.
Okay. And they might be chasing something and you might do a bunch of takes, but frankly, the higher up the ladder they are, the less work they are.
That's
one
good
of
to
the
know.
people I worked with a little bit, just a few, I guess, just post-pandemic, I worked with Leanne Rimes.
Okay.
She sang a new tune, a cappella, and then we recorded a piano under it. I want you to just think about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's
her intonation and her pitch. Never mind knowing where the note is, but all of her intonation, her timing, everything. That Daryl Brown was able to go in the next room and play piano to her voice.
That's remarkable.
Okay? So, then you get into another world, however, where this is a session, and it's hard to complain because everybody was so nice, but I did a 2-week session of writing camp with a young singer. They brought in several producers. And 2 of them were pretty serious producers, multi-instrumentalists, had real ideas, looking for her intent, asking her questions about why, and not like do this. And then there were several guys that came in with a laptop with beats on it. We're just, how about this one? How about this one? How about this one? And okay, that's new process. Maybe not the world I came up in. Sorry, I'm getting a text.
No.
Hopefully it's going away. Anyway, at the end of the 2 weeks, I did not have a complete song in the Studio Pro Tools rig. We did 6 songs or 7 songs, and I just had 4-bar bits. I was just capturing.
Okay.
And it was getting put together in Logic or something in somebody's laptop. And I have no interest in that.
Right.
I'm sorry. I was set up for full tracking. I would have been happy if a band came in and played. Or even if if anybody played more than one section of a song, I would have been far happier. But that's, it's what they wanted and it's what they were doing. I'm not even judging it. I'm just saying I'm not interested.
Right. No, I understand. The thing of looping top line and beats and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a completely different head. I know a lot of people who work that way these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's tools for that. Like Live is perfect for that. And
right.
I use Cubase people call me old-fashioned, but I also never loop and rarely use click either, so.
Right, yeah. I mean, you have to do what makes you happy in the end, especially as you age.
Yeah.
It's more and more important to do what makes you happy.
Yeah, that's true.
I do my own music and I do all the tricks. I mean, I'll tune myself, I'll punch in, I'll do the whole band before the drums because I have to economically. Whatever, it's fine as long as you get the result. Then I listen to even my own stuff later and it's like, oh, I can completely tell that drummer played to me and not the other way around.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, that gets to another sort of thing, although this even exists in the original analog multi-track world, but the difference between just laying things down track by track versus capturing something,
Right.
in room.
Yeah. I did both. The early part of my career, there really was a lot of overdubbing. Basics would, sometimes we do drums, bass, piano together or something like that. Sometimes we would do full bands. Peter Gordon and David Van Tieghem Peter would start with a very small basic and really build on it. And he would orchestrate with personalities, which was really fascinating to me, rather than just get players. It was all about the flavor of the player. And I was fortunate to be one of them. I played guitar on a lot of his records, and he would bring in, he'd have something that's reads like jazz or classical music, and he'd bring in Randy Gunn, who's a great rock player. But like, how does that fit? Well, it fits in Peter's world. It fits just fine. I did a session this year, January, with a band from Finland called Saima. And that was, 8 or 9 piece live tracking. And it was great. And it was all about the interplay, which is what you really lose. If you're doing a track by track, you have to kind of fake the interplay or give it up.
Right.
And, I did come up in the 80s, and a lot of 80s music, there isn't interplay. There's parts, and the parts fit together fine, but there's no interaction between the parts whatsoever. And at Battery Sound, we were quite popular for that because we had all the latest synthesizers and drum machines. We had a Fairlight, and later, towards the end, 2 Fairlights, a Fairlight 2 and a Fairlight 3. And it was, a magnet for people to get these sounds, to get these hot sounds. And then, great for me, I had to program them all. So I had to learn how to program them all. And there was a point where if you asked me to I could make a sound from scratch on a DX7, which that's,
not easy.
That's like pick the algorithm and how much feedback here, and kind of nutty. I could program the Fairlight. It was a very slow computer, and I could actually type in several commands and walk away and make coffee and come back, and it would be playing.
Yeah, I remember those days as well. The go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, because it's going to take a while to get there. And like David's records, he made these great records that were, really telegraphed what was to come in dance music. And, he was doing it for dancers, for professional modern dancers, largely, and making albums out of it. And that was 90% track by track.
Okay.
And a lot of electronics and, mixed with his live percussion, because he's a schooled percussionist. Would have his marimba in there and a drum kit and whatever, and we would mix those things. I should mention also with both Peter and David, initially they brought in Leanne Unger to engineer, and that was when I would assist. And I learned so much from Leanne. I always have to mention her.
Oh, yeah.
She was the old school New York engineer, where it's about the microphone and the preamp and get the hell out of the way. And there was a day when she called and she was late. And can you start? We're doing acoustic guitar first. Can you start? And I was like, yes, here's my moment. And I spent the entire time she wasn't there trying to get an acoustic guitar sound. And I'm a guitarist. And she walked in, I threw my hands up, and she looked at the console and she popped out the EQ and she popped out the insert that had the compressor and probably another EQ in it. And she went into the studio and pulled the mic back about 7 inches, and it was perfect.
Amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we've all had the experience of getting lost in the EQ and the compression, and you just keep turning knobs, trying to get back to what it sounded like before you put anything on it.
Yes. And in the meantime, burning out the player.
Yeah.
Because you're taking so much time.
I can still remember I was having a problem, and I was attempting to adjust the gain and on a compressor, and it just kept getting hissier and hissier and hissier. And I'm going, what the hell's going on? And I finally realized I was actually adjusting the threshold.
Yeah.
And it's just, you get lost. You absolutely.
Yeah. And more so once, I started maybe 6 months before MIDI hit.
Okay.
So initially, and really once MIDI was even in, there was not time code. We were using a square wave clock. And I had this big chart of tempos, how fast, and remember the Dr. Click.
Yeah.
Would divide or multiply your clock, because every box used a different clock rate. And then MIDI came in, and talk about getting lost. People would get lost. I would get lost in this fill, some fake drum fill. You spend an hour on it, 2 hours, just insanity.
Right.
Who cares? Probably better without the fill. Now my favorite drummer is like Brian McLeod. The fill is like, boom, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you hear the stories about David Robinson and the reason why he ultimately left the Modern Lovers. Jonathan Richman just kept taking away pieces of his kit until all he was left with was a snare with a towel over it. Well, I first met you working for Diamanda.
Right, yes.
So, and that all of a sudden is a live mixing world. Mm-hmm. Although complex, live mixing, but interested in the story that took you there.
Well, I had started mixing live actually in high school. Mm-hmm. It was a way to get my hands on the gear. And again, I had an ear, and I just knew how to do it. And I would go out, even when I was first working at Battery Sound, I would then go mix at CBGB's or somewhere in the evening, if schedules didn't collide. It's another whole thing. There's a performance element to mixing live that I enjoyed, especially with Diamanda. We used to joke that we were doing electronic music and she was the oscillator. And, we would agree on this processing strategy, but then just completely wing it. And I know at the kitchen, we did that show Vina Cava.
Yeah.
And the record, I feel like it's one of the best things I ever did, and it's almost unlistenable. It's really hard to get through and yet so beautiful. And I remember that in one of the shows, an audience member screamed, stood up, ran outside, and hid under a car. And I just thought, we're doing something right.
I just thought the mix on that and the way you and Diamanda interacted throughout the performances was just astonishing.
Thank you. That was really a match made in heaven. Thoroughly enjoyed it. She's such a fantastic artist and was willing to really let me in. And so I had my, not very many processors, frankly. It was a PCM42 delay, LXP1, and an LXP5. So all Lexicon. And I would just change settings on these things through the show, and she would hear it and then respond to that. So we were able to build up these kind of ghostly choruses and bending textures. And then we continued with that with her, well, actually it's backwards. The singer was first. We did an album and toured this album called The Singer.
Yeah, I love that one as well. It was so atypical for him.
She's doing, when I first met her, it was we were touring the Plague Mass. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much a set thing already. It had the backing tracks, and it was largely about her performance. It was where I started processing her like that, because she was using 2 microphones. And I thought, well, these microphones have to have completely different processes on them, or there's no point. And we toured that for a while. There was one night we were in Los Angeles, and I was hearing this weird thing on her voice, and then I realized I was speaking the text along with her. I was hearing myself. I got very, very deep into it. Anyway, then we did The Singer, bunch of blues songs, sung at the piano, again with this vocal processing thing, and the piano really taking the place of a rock band. Like just as loud and aggressive as you can make a piano. That's what we did. And I ended up with a system with the piano closed, so we didn't have feedback, and microphones inside hung in the harp of the piano. And and she's, a monster. Just a monster player. People think of her as the singer, but her piano playing is unreal. And we toured that all over Europe and all over America. And in America, we draw about 750 to 1,200 people. And in Europe, we would draw 2,500 to 3,500 people. Mm-hmm. And there was one night in Greece, because of the Plague Mass, largely comparing the Reagan administration to Leviticus in terms of AIDS, right? That's basically the thing of that piece. And, so you're working with the Bible, and you go to a really Christian country like Greece, and she was all over the newspapers, and we drew 20,000 people and, on a hilltop amphitheater in Athens.
Oh, that would be incredible. That's an amazing experience. Well, and carrying through all of those sorts of things. I mean, I think about Plague Mass, The Singer, which she did a smaller selection of that stuff at a benefit for the kitchen, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And then Vina Cava, which, the thing about Vina Cava that was so amazing was that it was none of the theatrics. I mean, she was up there on stage, looking actually a bit like Nana Muscora,
Yes, totally.
Wearing her glasses, wearing, white. And then there was the extravaganza of Insecta afterwards.
Yes.
Perhaps we won't discuss that one, but that's another.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that one didn't have the legs it could have.
Yeah.
It was a bit heavyweight.
Yeah, it needed a bit more time to develop, I think.
Yeah, perhaps. That was actually the premiere of Insecta was the night I met Hal Willner.
Right. Yeah.
He was backstage, and that was when we started to work together.
Yeah, because we'd brought Hal in as a board member at the kitchen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and then with like Hal and Sue Jacobs and all of that, I think that led you, which gets me to the next stage of questions, into the work you started doing in film.
Yeah. I'd actually done a couple of films before that. Well, I'd actually done I feel like the progression is I did a bunch of off-Broadway theater, and then film, and largely, again, here we are, Peter Gordon, David Van Tieghem. These guys they liked me. It was a good fit, and they kept me alive for a really long time. And once, so did a film with David called Working Girls. With Peter, we did Joe versus the Volcano, of all things.
Okay.
We had the Persuasion singing this nonsensical supposed island language. It was hysterical.
Yeah.
And then with Hal, the first thing I did, I met Hal that night with Insecta, and then within a week or two, he had finished his Charles Mingus record.
Right.
And they had a big party, and so this was my, getting to know you kind of thing. I went to the party and all that. And then very shortly after that, Sue called me up to work on Robert Altman's Shortcuts. And, I'm an enormous Robert Altman fan.
Yeah.
I think my favorite movies at that time were Nashville and MASH.
All right.
In 2001, not him, but anyway. So we came out to LA and we hired Limobile, which is a truck I used a few times after that, Guy Charbonneau's truck. And we had Annie Ross of Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross was in the cast. Okay. So her character in the movie owned a jazz club, kind of a divey jazz club. And the characters, it's funny because I mention it to people, they don't remember the jazz club. That's not a scene that made an impression, but that's where we parked the truck and we recorded Annie and a band. Bobby Previtt on drums, Gene Estes on vibes, Terry Adams of NRBQ on piano,
right,
and Greg Cohen on bass. Nice band.
That's quite a band.
Yeah, really a killer band. And we were parked there for 2 weeks. So when we weren't shooting, we would record, they'd shoot Annie singing the song, and then I'd give them a mix for playback. And I'd do other things while they shot other scenes. And Annie would mime in the background so they could cut away to Downey or Tom Waits or whoever. And then when they were shooting elsewhere, we would record the band without Annie to do score. And we fashioned almost the entire score of the movie off that soundstage. And at the end, they brought in Mark Isham, and I think he wrote about 16 minutes worth of music because there was stuff that just wasn't covered.
Yeah.
You have a kid dying in a hospital. Maybe the jazz band is not it's what you want.
Right. That's absolutely remarkable because that's just not done.
No, but that's Hal.
Yeah.
And and I get those. I remember a friend asking, how do you get these cool gigs? And it's because I say yes. And because I'm not afraid of that. It's like, yeah, okay, we'll do it. I'll make it work. And then you're sitting around with Altman and Annie Ross and all these Robert Downey Jr. and all these actors. And you're thinking, how did I get here? So I said yes. That's how I got here.
Right. And kind of remarkable to think that a downtown avant-garde music gig leads to working on Hollywood film.
Yeah, but it's still...
I mean, it is Altman.
You know what I mean? It's still an auteur film.
Yeah.
But yeah, and hey, guess what? We fit right in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you mentioned, I mean, particularly you've got somebody like David Van Tieghem who has that same kind of crossover
Yeah, totally.
that you have as well. Working with the total hardcore downtown New York, and then also being on pop hits and film.
Mm-hmm. Duran.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a handful of people like that. I think of, and both singers, Janice Pendarvis and Dolette McDonald as well.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Worked with Laurie, and
it was really. It really fit who I am because I like pop music. Like, I really love pop music, but I also really love really weird shit. And so my career went exactly where I should have gone. I mean, it was perfect. And then I could then bring those worlds with me. I became one of the facets rather than just a passenger, and I would bring oddball stuff into a Lucinda Williams record or a Keith Urban record,
Yeah, I think it's, only sort of, let's say, mainstream isn't exactly the word, but, mainstream fans or whatever who don't like pop music, because it's sort of every experimental musician I've ever known is also a huge ABBA fan.
Right. Totally. And I remember talking to Laurie one night, and we were talking about how the timeline from avant-garde to mainstream had gotten compressed. And, in decades, it's not like anybody was listening to something that sounded like Xenakis except the art crowd, until decades later, right? But here we are in the 80s, 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And it's really simple because all the people that went to art school are working on Madison Avenue, and they go to the gallery on Saturday, and then they bring that with them on Monday. Same thing. And you'd start to see, I can't think of a good example, but you'd see a TV commercial that's totally left field. And I think that's where it came from.
That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you listen to some of the stuff that's being done in hip hop these days, and I mean, really starting with, it became really obvious with, the Bomb Squad and that whole thing. But even now, just exactly what Stockhausen was doing and things like that over a P-Funk beat. And
it's true.
That's mainstream. I mean, that's,
I know.
Really remarkable.
It's where we've gotten to, and maybe something's gotten lost along the way, but I'm not going to judge that. Everybody I talk to is like, what happened? Pop music's so empty and all that. And to some degree, yeah, but you have to look around, because there's still some really good stuff out there. It's just, find what you like. Don't blame them for not giving you what you like.
Yeah, exactly. Take
a little responsibility,
Yeah, it's just, you have access to it. It's just not being funneled all into the same channel. So, right. The mainstream radio is like mainstream radio in the 1950s,
Yeah, it's not like mainstream radio in the 70s where you'd have Love is Blue up next to Smoke on the Water.
Right.
Up next to Ballad of Billy Joe.
Right. But the
right?
fact is,
boom, 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 right in a row.
You can still find that today.
It's a funny thing with, everybody vilifies the labels as the gatekeepers, and sometimes rightly so, but they were also a sorting device.
Yeah.
And I knew if something had that yellow Atlantic record, I would probably like it, whether it was jazz or country or, they had a full roster of musicians. But there was a taste and an agenda behind it, and I knew it's going to be okay.
Oh, yeah.
There's not a lot
see.
in common to me between Aretha and Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Right,
The
but
same label.
you
I
see
like them both.
Atlantic. I had a friend in the 70s who, and this will probably betray his taste, but pretty much everything he listened to was on Mercury, you know. So it was in that kind of proto metal pop,
Yep.
So somewhere between Rush and Sweet,
Yes,
sort of stuff.
exactly.
And you'd see the Mercury label and you knew what yeah, really, really good point. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't listened, you should listen to, you can get it because you get it worldwide on BBC Sounds. Iggy Pop has a show every Saturday called Iggy Confidential. And it's exactly what you describe, and it will be, he'll play Stockhausen and then Kendrick Lamar and then Eddie Palmieri. And then he'll tell you how they're connected.
Right. Yeah. Brilliant. He is a sweet guy and very smart.
Oh, really, really smart. But I remember he was playing some avant-garde piece, and I wish I remembered what it was, and then went into Eddie Palmieri, who I'd worked with at the Palladium many, many times. And he said, well, Eddie was a classical music prodigy as a child. So, he played with symphonies, so, and that was his connection between pretty much poppy Latin, salsa stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But he's going, this guy has the deep,
Yeah, right.
creds.
All that knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also,
circling back. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
just circling back to Altman, I wanted to mention the next movie, Kansas City, Robert Altman's Kansas City. It's the movie that changed my life because my wife was my wife now was the accountant then on the film. And we had what, by rights should have been like a week and a half long fling. And now we have two kids that are 19 and 22. And, so it really, I moved to LA, all that, it really, really shook up my world. But that again was a bar. It's almost the same thing as Shortcuts. It was a bar with a band in it. And the conceit was that the band was closed. The bar was closed. And the band was there because it was during the musician strike of the early 30s. I can't really remember what years, but there was a strike and no records came out for like a year, something, 2 years. And music was quite different on the other side of that break. Somehow there was this sea change in that time. And this is the backdrop for what's basically a gangster movie. And we, again, used Limobile, drove it out to St. Louis, and had just the most amazing band of mostly young, sort of new traditionalist players. Joshua Redman, you can look up the credits. And then some older guys that, like Ron Carter. And we had both Christian McBride and Ron Carter. Excuse me. And the idea was that the band was just jamming, and then they would cut away to whatever action was going on with, Harry Belafonte and the rest of the cast. And it was great because I had actually, my first internship before I got the job at Battery Sound, I worked at Soundworks, which was under Studio 54, and Harry Belafonte was managed by the people that ran the studio.
Okay.
And part of my job was to take care of Harry, like whatever he wanted. We had a standing order that I'd run out to the grocery store and get whatever he liked. And anyway, he pretended to remember that. It was very nice. And
nice.
So we would record this band, but everything was this crazy stuff again. Like Altman would just say, okay, this tune is just sax and guitar and vocal, but the vocalist is going to be behind the bar and the sax player is going to be at a table and, whatever. And he would just spot people around for camera. And then I would have to hide all the microphones. Because it's 1930, you can't even see, there's no PA, you can't see anything.
Right.
And so I had lavalier mics just sticking a tiny bit out under a table, or we'd put, in one case we got really stuck and we put a trumpet case with a hat on top of it and just had the mic on a stand behind it, but 3 camera angles. So it was really tricky, and every shot was different. And it was, up to, I think I had 28 microphones out there. I had a bunch of them up in the lighting grid.
Okay.
And stuff hidden all over, and we would move them around. And this whole time it was wicked thunderstorm outside. So anytime you had to run between, I don't know, it was tornado season. My hotel, I'd just watch the storms going by from my window. What little time I spent in the hotel because I was in the truck or out with my wife. And, I remember asking Bob, do you want to come in and hear what we're doing? And he was just like, no, I know you're doing all right, or you wouldn't be here.
Nice.
And like, wow, this is the gift of my career, is meeting these people that are pivotal to my taste.
Yeah.
And being treated, some people are more than equal than others, but basically being treated like an equal by these people. I feel very fortunate about it.
Oh, that's particularly special.
It was really good. And that was, and then getting invited over to his house to watch football. It's just like, okay. That, by the way, was largely an analog project.
Okay.
Circle back to the analog thing. That was 2 Studer 24 tracks, and we would overlap them by about 5 minutes so that we could always be continuously in record. We never had to worry about the end of a reel because you'd always get it and you could cut it out, splice together somehow, which literally, yes, splice the tape. And we ran DA88s as backup, so that was the first kind of digital inroad into my life.
Mm-hmm.
Multi-track wise, I guess we had the PCM F1 at battery to mix to for a while, which put 2 tracks on beta tape. But anyway, it was largely an analog project, analog console. The truck still exists. I ran into Ian Gee's son recently. They don't use the truck as much as they use the fly rig now. They have a smaller rig that just packs down. Truck's kind of huge.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. I mean, both video and audio today is in these smaller flyaways. As it can be. You don't have these massive powered backplanes that you have to.
Yeah, exactly. Look, on YouTube, you can still find a thing called, I think it's called Jazz 30. Jazz 34, a remembrance or something like that, or Robert Altman's Jazz 34, and it's the music without the movie. So you can actually see the complete takes, shot so beautifully by Oliver Stapleton and his crew.
I will look for that.
It's really pretty wonderful.
Because I remember, and it's very special because I remember talking to you. I think it was when first you'd done some work for Shortcuts, and hearing the stories about how, for the film world, Altman was, and not just with music, but just recording actors and everything, had, a unique perspective for film about multi-track recording and being able to, and having opportunities to mix, and not just doing everything in, looping afterwards and stuff.
Right. Yeah. He detested any artifice. He just wanted to really shoot what was there. What's his name? John Pritchett was his mixer, on set mixer. And somewhere you can find an interview with John about the opening of the Player, because that they probably walk about a quarter of a mile and it's one shot. And he had to somehow combination of radio mics and preset snakes with mics attached to them and 2 rigs, and he was able to capture all. It's amazing. There's a job I never want.
Wow.
But so, and we had John on both of these films as well.
Well,
but he did not want anything fake. It had to be real, and you had to get it. You had to get it on the take you wanted. And sometimes Hal would be like, "But that's not the best take musically." And somebody, the editor or Bob would say, "Yeah, but so and so did this." And Hal would be like, "Yeah, he moved his hand this way, so now that's the take." But then we were able we had a lot of leeway in the soundtrack album. And we're able to really go for takes that we liked better, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to fit the picture anymore. Okay. And some editing that I actually listened to it just a week or two ago. I think it's on the Kansas City After Dark, which is like the volume 2 of the music. And it's the song Indiana. And it transitions through 3 takes, and one of them is Fathead Newman alone.
Okay.
And then the crowd kind of fades in, and it cuts to a different take with the whole band, and I think there's another edit later. And it took on kind of a cinematic quality, which is also something that Hal liked and I really liked, is like, you got to be able to visualize what's happening. The music shouldn't be in a complete vacuum. It's like, if you close your eyes, you should kind of see the band. And which comes down to your panning and the treatment on the instruments and so forth.
Ah, that's nice.
I did a lot of really good things with Hal.
Yeah, Hal was pretty special.
Yeah, and he got me on Saturday Night Live for a season before I moved.
Oh,
that's just stress salad. I mean, it was not fun. It was great.
I know.
It was great, but it was not fun.
In the late 80s, early 90s, before I went to work at the kitchen, I was working for SIR.
Mm-hmm.
So I would always bring over the back line and take away the back line,
right?
Or the musical acts. There was a guy, actually, it was really interesting. There was a guy permanently in place. Speedy, was he still there when you were there?
I can't think of. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
He looked like he had a total hairband.
Yeah, little guy, right?
Yeah,
short. Yeah.
And he worked for SIR, but he was placed at Saturday Night Live because, it was changing day to day.
Oh.
And yeah, but I know exactly what that was like, because I would roll in Friday afternoon with whatever was the final backline.
Right. And I wasn't really doing the band.
Okay.
I was doing on-air playback.
Okay.
Josiah Glover was a great mixer.
Stuff,
he moved over into the band room, and Hal brought me in to do the on-air playback. So we'd do sketch music, and I would record Don Pardo and roll in about half the voiceovers. The latter half of the show was me playing back Pardo. He would do the first part live per contract, and then per contract, he went home and went to bed, and I finished the show. Somewhere I have a bunch of dats of him saying, "Hi, Eric. How are you?"
That'd be great. You could create a piece out of that.
Yeah, totally. Scott Johnson piece.
But there were strange things that had to be done with that. Here's I'll just tell you my annoying story or whatever. This was when Cheryl Hardwick was the music director.
Uh-huh.
And this will make sense in a bit. This is when Lou Reed and John Cale were recording songs for Drella at the record plant.
Right.
So there was, and Cheryl Hardwick had on stage at Saturday Night Live, it was like a 9-foot Steinway.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, at one point, the 9-foot Steinway that was on stage at Saturday Night Live belonged to John Cale, and the Steinway that was sitting in the record plant belonged to Cheryl Hardwick, which was another Steinway 9-foot grand piano. And me and another guy had to move the two.
Yeah, swap them.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
And in Rockefeller Center, no problem, they've got those things. Mm-hmm. But you remember the record plant.
Oh,
we had to fit a 9-foot Steinway somehow into that passenger elevator. Because for some reason, there was some, aesthetic difference between these two Steinways.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a little work with John Cale. We did some stuff. I did a huge gospel choir for one of his records.
Okay.
For Locusts. And then, oh my God. Okay, here's an annoying story. We did a long form commercial, like a cinema commercial, for somebody in Spain.
Okay.
He called, he'd written this PQ, and, it was like Ben Porowski and Eric Sanko, and I can't remember who the guitar player was. A really good band, we're going to get this. Oh, it's going to be so easy. And we were at Sorcerer Sound, my favorite room at the time, big room at Sorcerer. And the tape came in. We're all set up to sync the video. The tape came in and it's labeled PAL, not NTSC, all right, the European standard. We'll play back. Okay, well, let's rehearse the band and we'll get a PAL player. So we called whoever we rented the video gear from. Took hours to get there. Gets there, we put it in. The tape is labeled PAL, but it's an NTSC tape.
Okay.
So we had just blown away like half a day. And, I really had to credit John because he's a bit fiery, and he stood up really straight, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and I thought, I'm gonna die. And he just kind of started massaging me and said, "It's gonna be all right."
Nice.
And then we got it in 2 takes again by that time. But oh my God, standards. That's why there are so many of them. Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the joke? Why are there, the standards are great? That's why there are so many of them.
Yeah. I mean, I for a number of years, I was head of technology for the BBC in Scotland when the BBC was making the transition from tape to tapeless. And this was, so I had lots of conversations with people like Avid, et cetera, regarding standards. And they'd even say, oh yeah, we're following the standard, only it was their flavor of the standard now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it's not even that it's a different standard. It's a flavor of the standard in a different container.
Yeah. Same thing with the clocks that I started out with drum machines.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll sync to it, except you have to multiply it by 4.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So SNL, my rig for Hal's scoring. So all right, Hal had the NBC music library and his own stuff at his disposal, mostly vinyl.
Yeah.
Some CDs, mostly vinyl.
I moved
he would
that
go
from
through-
30 Rock to his apartment one day.
Yeah, right. And then he mailed it to me, and it was at my house for years. And then I moved it to the Village, and it was. There's actually still a big crate of CDs in my garage that says.
Amazing.
We didn't have much to play back on. We had 3 digicarts, which were the state of the art at the time. It's basically a hard drive with a go button. Play, transport on it, and there was very crappy PC attached to one of the digicarts in case you needed to do some fancy kind of chaining things together or change the order or whatever. They were very clunky. They sounded great, but they were really clunky. And we had turntable, which is where the music came from. And Hal would mark up, put Post-its on these records and say, side 1, cut 3 from 33 seconds to 45 seconds. They were all little pieces. Sometimes they were almost a minute long. And I would record these onto analog carts. So the stereo version of an 8-track, these big clunky analog carts, because that was the only thing that when it finished, whenever it hit blank tape, it would re-cue automatically. Okay. So I had 12 analog cart machines in a rack on one side of me, Harrison broadcast console in front of me, and on the other side, 3 digit carts. And that was how we scored. We would get the script and mark up where to change music, and I would play and crossfade like this, just trying to time it right. And Hal was always yelling louder, louder, and Bobby, who mixed the show, was yelling, "You're killing me, you're killing me." So loud. Hal behind me going, "Louder, louder." And that's how we scored a season's worth of shows. And for that whole season, with the exception of one show, I was the first thing to happen in black at the top of the show. Scary.
Man.
Really scary.
Terrifying.
And Bobby Caminetti, who called the show, would say, "Okay, 15 seconds. Now wait for me, Eric. Wait for me, because we're not on the network. 15 seconds, 10 seconds. You got to wait for me, Eric. Okay, 7. And like, terrifying. It got to the point where I got used to it, but then I would just do it, and we'd start the show. And then as soon as I was out, I'd have this horrible, like, heart attack moment. Well, the adrenaline would happen after the fact.
Yeah,
and
what?
That was the last season of that analog system. Then they ripped it all out and they put it in SSL with play buttons on every channel that were all linked to hard drives and blah, blah, blah. And Marty took over.
It sounds like your work with Arthur Russell prepared you to be able to do this.
This is why, like I was saying, I say yes and I work it out.
Yeah.
Because, I can do that and not flip out.
Right.
And I'm fine around strong personalities. I've only ever been really intimidated, kind of in my own head, maybe twice. And one was when I met Terry Riley, the composer of Instinct, Rainbow and Curve and all that. I said hi and I walked away. I didn't know what to say. Like, that's it. And
I can understand that.
And then Todd Rundgren, who was really who I wanted to be when I started out. When I met him, I was a little terrified. And that actually worked out by the end of the evening. We got along great.
Oh, good. Because, I know that he can be a bit prickly as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although, if from what I understand, he respects talent. So.
Oh yeah, he's all good. Once maybe you have to prove yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I met him once. I actually talked, and this will date me. Talked him into using for music production Atari STs instead of Amigas. Because he came into a place I was working and was all hep on Amiga. And I said, no. You want Atari. And he went with that. But that's my sum total of Todd Rundgren experience.
Yeah, I have a friend now that works with him a lot and travels out to Hawaii and does live shows with him and stuff. And I recently went back and listened to one of his lesser known records called Second Wind. Do you know that one?
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah.
It was recorded. I'm not sure that it's supposed to be fully programmatic like a musical, but it was recorded without drama, just, musicians, microphones, clear sonic isolating panels around people. It was recorded in front of a live audience, no overdubs.
Yeah.
And it is stunning.
I'll have to listen to that again.
It's so good. And it's kind of funny because I still don't like the second cut. For some reason, that one just eh. The rest of the record has me either in awe or in tears.
I'll have to listen to that again. Because I remember, I think it was his reaction to his previous album, a cappella, which was, nothing but samples and programming. And
right.
He kind of wanted to take a completely opposite approach.
It's stunning. He is one of the loudest singers I've ever worked with.
Oh, yeah?
The amount of volume that comes out of his body is just insane. And it's completely in tune and soulful. He's not shouting.
No, his breadth and range, is just kind of astonishing when, he comes out with, or makes his mark in a big way. The thing that stopped him from becoming a computer programmer for IBM, with Something, Anything. And he's pegged as the male Carole King. Mm-hmm. And then he comes out with A Wizard, a True Star after that. And it's sort of like...
mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Those two records, just mind-blowing. It's actually, here's a great technology moment. A Wizard, a True Star actually sounds good now because it doesn't have to be squeezed onto vinyl.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad you just said that. Because I hate vinyl.
Uh-huh.
And it's, and people don't understand. Separate vinyl from analog.
Yes.
And, when you're dealing with a great analog desk and a good tape machine, your headroom is virtually infinite. You don't have to deal with Nyquist, which cuts you off at 20K.
Far too low, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't care if we can actually hear it. We're still perceiving it.
Yes, we are.
Sorry.
Because you've got difference tones and combination tones and all of that sort of stuff. And the thing is, when you put that onto vinyl, you lose it.
Yeah. And also you don't have the same bandwidth or amplitude as you get closer to the center.
Yeah.
Everything shrinks down. And, in a way, that had an interesting effect on the sequencing of albums. Okay. And made the side one, side two thing really work.
Right.
Because side two is like a re-intro because you're big again.
Right, that's true.
The last song can't be big on either side.
All right, you're fitting it all into lesser and lesser.
Thank you, Pi. Your track length is getting shorter and shorter and shorter as it spirals in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I just recommissioned my turntable last year after years of saying I was going to do it. I finally did it, and I'm still using my AR-77B because I brought it to the hi-fi shop. I never go in hi-fi shops. I have no interest in home stereo at all. And as long as it sounds okay, I'm fine. And the guy said, honestly, I don't have anything better than this up to like $1,000. So why don't you let me just do a little refurb on it? And that's what I did. And I'm enjoying listening to the vinyl, and yeah, it sounds good, but it's so much more an emotional thing than it is a sonic thing.
Yeah.
Because I pull out that record and it's, I'm like, oh, look at this article I stuffed in the sleeve, and it's more like that, reliving my past in a really not connective way than it is some, wholly miraculous audio experience.
I agree. I think there's something to the haptics of it and the fact that it's basically the size of a human head.
Yeah, there you go.
So
I missed the cover. I missed the liner notes.
And that cover, because the CD cover didn't work, it fills your vision as you hold it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But man, I do not miss the surface noise. I do not miss the compressed dynamic range. Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. And actually, I mentioned that band Jade Warrior.
Yeah.
They made 4 albums for Island Records. They were Island's answer to Tubular Bells, basically.
Okay.
That was what really generated it. Before that, they had made records for Virgin. They were kind of more of a King Crimson.
Okay.
More African influenced King Crimson, more in that range with a vocalist. And all of their records go down to near silence.
Yeah.
Because very often at the beginning of the record, I listened to one actually last night. I was listening to the record Kites, and I can listen to it now streaming off Apple Music, lossless. Sounds great.
Right. And
I can actually hear the stuff that on vinyl, I argued with myself whether it was there or not. Yeah. Am I making this up? It's just very, very quiet sounds. And to me, they're important to the piece. They're the setup. And all of the records went down to that. And I would buy, actually, like if I went home and pulled my Jade Warrior records, I would have 2 or 3 copies of every one. Because as they wore, I would go searching for another one because I couldn't stand the noise.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna listen to this now. You've got me really intrigued.
Look for the Island ones. Floating World, Waves, I think is the best. Kites, Way of the Sun. They all have similar covers. They are just now on Apple Music.
Okay.
They weren't, even last month they weren't on Apple Music. Now they are. And if you want to buy them on CD, we can do a sidebar and I'll tell you which ones to look for because there's some awful CD issues.
Well, I subscribe to Apple Music, so I'll find that and then we'll see. But it's those, yeah, it's those aspects. I mean, I remember there's this I don't know, it may be 20 years old now. Article, I think it's in the LA Weekly or whatever. And among the people that they talk to is Bob Clearmountain. Mm-hmm. And he talks about, he says, you spend all of this time and effort, and he was particularly talking about something that he'd recorded for the band. And it was just beautiful. And then, the vinyl, it just took all the low end away, and he said, you've got this gorgeous master. And then you hear the vinyl and you just get depressed.
Yeah. Mostly.
Yeah. So I am glad to hear that from you as well, because.
Yeah. And I think, everybody vilified CDs as being harsh and all that, but a lot of that comes back to us guys trying to overcome tape and vinyl.
Yeah.
So we would heap all of this high end and upper mid, especially upper mid, onto the thing to get it to cut. Because as you run the tape over and over again, you don't make an album in a day. So you go a couple of weeks rolling this tape back and forth, the high end falls off. And so you have to compensate for that both on your tracking and on your mix. And then you put that on a medium where you don't lose it. And it's horrifying, We all had to adjust to being flatter.
Yeah, you're hearing what you think the final product's going to be.
Yeah.
You trained yourself.
Yeah.
You've
I remember friends coming into the studio, non-professionals coming into the studio and saying, God, it's so bright. It's like, yeah, it won't be.
It won't be. Right. You've got the RIAA curve imprinted in your brain.
Exactly.
Well, and the other thing is what's helped as well is, mixing in 24-bit, having dither and all of that to,
32 floating point. 96K 32 floating point is my sweet spot. That's what works for me. It's as easy to mix. Somehow 48, 24 is very easy to mix. And I think it's because it puts a little bit of gauze over everything.
Yeah.
And that kind of just makes it a little mushy and kind of comfy. I don't know. But the 96 32 floating, it just sounds like what I put in.
Yeah.
And I find I use fewer plugins.
I'll try it. I tend to stick to 48, but 32-bit floating. Beauty of 32-bit floating is you don't have to worry about clipping, and you don't have to worry about levels being too low either.
Yeah. It's very scalable.
It's all there. You stick it in. You just hit normalize, and you don't have to worry.
Yeah, it basically works, and you can clip gain things, and you can, I printed that too hot. It's like, just turn it down.
Yeah, that was the magic thing for me. It's like, oh man, I can get rid of the clipping.
Yeah, it's outstanding.
This information is still
and not
there.
In a fake way. Yeah, not in a fake way, not in just shelving it off or some algorithm.
No, that's the one. There are two things, and the other one is completely analog. But two things in audio that feel like, I don't know, magic or voodoo to me. And that's this getting rid of the clipping in 32-bit. And the other one is mid-side recording.
Oh, well, yeah. That's
three channels out of two microphones. This is voodoo.
Yeah, it's voodoo, and it's something that, again, in the modern age, there are a lot of people who engineer in a way that doesn't involve air.
Right.
Meaning it's all direct. And the magic and to me, a lot of the fun of being an engineer is which microphone where. And then as time went by, and it actually happened when I was working with Lucinda Williams, it became which microphone on which instrument, how far away, in what part of the room. And really adding all of this up into a picture. And I remember I co-produced two of Lucinda's records, and on the first one, Little Honey, Ed Cherney walked in, and we were at the Village. He had a room upstairs. I saw him all the time. He was a great guy. Miss him. And I played him a little bit, and he's like, wow, he was always a really good supporter. I played him a little bit, and he says, oh, sounds great. And then he looks over at the console, and he goes, you're not using any Q? You're not aux sends? And I just sat back and smiled, and he said, I'm going to go upstairs and rethink my world. But it really
impressive.
I had this epiphany right before that record. I was actually scoring a TV show, some reality TV, right? And top secret missions of the CIA, and whatever. And I was at home working on it, and I had my coffee, and I put a coaster down on my 70s Mesa Boogie amp and put my coffee on it, and then I plugged into a Line 6 pod. And I kind of looked at myself, and I thought, what am I doing? And I thought, well, I'm doing the right thing because I have to get this sound back for the next 15 episodes. And if there's a change, I got to change with it, and it has to all be repeatable. So I'm doing the right thing. But it made me look at what am I doing and why? And like mid-side, ORTF, spaced omnis, spaced XY, cardioids, all these things are really important, and a lot of people have no idea. I got a Trent Reznor gig. He had all these in-house engineers, but none of them had mic'd a string section. And he had a session that was a string trio and 2 pianos. And they were like, I don't know how to do that. And I'm not in that world, but I got the gig because it's just what I do.
Right.
And at the end, he's another guy that can be kind of prickly and just very short, and I kind of got over a little of that because I started talking and he was like, I just want to finish working. And I said, well, let me say one thing. You did the score for Natural Born Killers and you used a record of Diamanda's that I produced. And I was really happy to hear it there. And so we got along a little better after that. At the end of the session, he came in and he said, my voice sounds so great. What do you have on my voice? And I just said, this. I said, I'll tell you the whole chain. It won't sound like this. When somebody else does it, it's about whatever. It's about my perspective on these things. And so all these mic techniques and where you use them and why, to me, that's the shit.
Yeah, you got to have the room, you got to have the air, because what a musician is playing is influenced by the sound of the space that they're in.
Completely, and it should be so obvious. And we live in an analog world. And okay, if you want to talk about harsh digital, yeah, digital is right angles. They might get smaller and smaller and smaller, but they're right angles. Your ear cannot track a right angle.
Yeah.
So yeah, these higher resolutions, great. It makes that less perceptible. But we live in an analog world until you get down to the quantum level of photons. Then things start to behave not like waves and like particles, but that's another podcast.
Depending on how you're looking at them as well.
Totally, which is all about, I think that's, again, a reason I got a lot of work is I come in with a perspective. I'm not part of the machine. And, I will absolutely, if somebody says, no, I don't like it, I just abandon it and do something else. I'm not going to take anything personally, but I just, that's it. I come in with a perspective, whether I'm producing or engineering. I don't want to just be a cog.
Yeah. Thinking about another one, you talk about the Rundgren album. What is it? There's a Joe Jackson album, Body and Soul, I think it was called. It was recorded at RCA Studios with just 2 mics.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best sounding.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best sounding recordings I've ever heard.
It's stunning. Big World is good too, and that's off a stage. That's all live.
Yeah. You have players who know how to manage their own dynamics.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I was in kind of a glammy band a decade ago.
Okay.
And we cut an album in my house, basically. And then right after that, I did an album here in this house in Joshua Tree for a singer-songwriter, and I had Brian McLeod play drums. And I played it for the drummer in the band I was in, and he was like, how'd you get that drum sound? What did you use? And I said, well, I used the same mics I used on you, but that's the way he tunes his drums and hits them.
Yeah.
Let's start at the source. Brian McLeod is a master of dynamics, and he's certainly not a quiet drummer, really, but he hits the metal very differently than he hits the skin.
Yeah.
And so it solves all my problems. All my problems with a drum set is getting bleed out of tom-toms. and that kind of thing, getting the toms going out of the snare. All these things, and none of them. A friend said, you can put 2 mics on him or you can put 10 mics. Doesn't sound any different.
Yeah. That's, the famous, everybody wants the John Bonham drum sound.
Right.
And the John Bonham drum sound was recorded with 2 mics, you know.
3, actually.
Oh, 3. Yeah,
One.
sorry. The 3.
Yeah, one in front, one to the side, and one above.
Right. Carefully measured.
Yes.
And to get that sound.
And try to replicate it. It's really hard.
Yeah. No, to get that sound, you've got to have somebody who, like Bonham, knows how to tune his drums.
Yeah.
And knows how to play.
Totally.
And that's it. You know, you want to know what that groove is.
Yeah.
And
completely.
That's the sound.
And, you know, serving the song.
Yeah.
In addition to engineering, of course, I play guitar, and I've, you know, a lot of the people I've mentioned, I've also toured with them. Some of them playing guitar and mixing at the same time. Some of them like doing the first half mixing and then running on stage for the second half.
Right.
Really fun. And right now I'm in like a house band once a month. And talk about serving the song.
Yeah.
Because here's somebody you've never met in a song that you've never played, possibly with other players you've never played. And it's a character builder.
Oh, yeah.
And you really learn what's important, and what's important is not your thing. What's important is what the audience enjoys. And, you know, your contribution should be just that. It's a contribution. It's not a showcase, unless you're Steve Vai and it's a Steve Vai record. Then it's a showcase. Fine.
Yeah.
But otherwise, and I've always tried to bring my thing in a way that serves it. I was very happy when I worked with Keith Urban I guess we worked for a couple of years, 2011 through 13 or 12 through 14 or somewhere in there. And, you know, spotting, because he's split between Nashville and LA and Australia, and busiest guy ever, also one of the nicest guys ever.
Yeah.
Superb guitar player. And the record was called Fuse, and it was number 1. It's my only number 1 thing that has my name on it. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It's, you know, it can't be knocked. And I was really happy to hear. I did his vocals and his guitar solos on about 2/3 of the record. Most of the rest of it was already done. Mm-hmm. And again, this thing with, you know, many engineers having their hands on this, at least it was very tidy. There was upwards of 80 tracks on everything because things were doubled, and it's very hard to navigate when you just first sit down. It's like, where are the guitars? And you scroll. But anyway, I brought my guitar thing, which is always more than one mic, and no mic is right in the face of the amp. Because to me, that's live sound. That's to eliminate leakage. You know, or if you're in a small studio and the drummer's right next to you, yeah, then you put it in the face of the amp. Otherwise, I'd back off. You know, nobody puts their head against the cabinet.
Right.
I hope. So I had, I was at the Village, so they have it's my home these days, or since I moved here, the Village has been my home. Jeff Greenberg's a big supporter of me, and vice versa. Anyway, I had, I think, everybody said, "Oh, it's a guitar." This goes back to like, why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. Everybody says, "Oh, put a 57 on it, put a 421 on it. It's a tom-tom, put a 421 on it." No. So I had, I think, a C12A on the front of the cabinet. And then I had various Neumanns in different spots of the room.
Okay.
And so on the guitar overdub, I was always taking usually just 2 of them and panning them in a certain way. You know, and I'm landing into the Nashville thing, it rolls out, it's pretty done already. By the time you're putting the vocals on, everything's been compressed and processed and comped and blah, blah, blah. It's just really baked in. And so I would swing the room mic and the dry mic around until it felt good in the track. And when I got the record, when it came out, they were in the same place, which I thought was a really fantastic compliment. It was like exactly what I did. Yeah. It was right there. I tend to go for very simple setups. I don't put a lot of mics on things, but that is one thing. There has to be a room mic on a guitar, on an electric guitar. anyway. It gets very tiresome for me just hearing that close thing. And, one of my favorite things is Queen's Sheer Heart Attack.
Yeah.
The guitar sound on that is enormous, and it just sounds like you're in a big room and it's louder than hell.
Yeah.
Exciting,
Well, and I mean, with the way he put his rig together, they have no choice, but you have to mic the room to get what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's got two cabinets. He's got two different sounds coming out that you need to step back from.
Yeah.
You've got to have some distance from the cabinets in order for the mixing to happen. Already.
Exactly. And then it's basically delivered to you. There's your sound.
Yeah.
And Keith was like he's so on it in terms of his playing and his rig and just his attitude. just really brings the right thing to every song. He never uses the same exact setup song to song.
Okay.
And we had a big discussion about the most reviled amp in the world, the JC 120. And he's like, no, there's always a JC 120 somewhere in my tune because it just sounds different and that it fills a niche.
Yeah. And era-wise, back in the late 80s at SIR, I humped a lot of those.
Yeah, I bet you did. I still have one.
Okay.
It sits on my Fender Rhodes. That's its job now. It rarely does anything else.
Let's see, it was, because, at that point, very few people wanted Fender Twins.
Yeah.
Sadly. So it was JC 120s or Marshall stack for the certain,
Right. Never mind a deluxe or a small Ampeg is really the answer.
Yeah. And SVT, 8x12.
Right.
But that was it. A JC 120, SVT, 8x12. In studios for basses, some people would use, a nice simple hard key.
Right. Or a B15.
Yeah. I loved moving the B15s because
it's easy. They're small and they have wheels. I'm an Ampeg guy. I love Ampegs. Yeah. I'm starting to divest of them, but at one point I had 7 vintage Ampegs of every. Yeah, it's just wonderful to me. And I often bring them to gigs. If I'm engineering, and just put them in the corner and have at it if you want them. It's not going to sound like what you brought.
I think the SVT 8x12s, mixed feelings. I love the way they sounded. The better thing about them, and we did it this way in my band, it was not an 8x12. It was two I can't count. Yeah, two 4x6 cabinets.
Right.
Which you could put on either side of the stage.
Beautiful. Yeah. Then you fill it. You don't have to be as loud. Exactly. And everybody can hear you. Yeah. I often run, if I'm using my Mesa Boogie, I'll put another 12 on the other side of the stage.
Yeah.
And it's just I remember somebody opened for me and they were like, what? My guitar sounds so good. They used my amp and I was like, why? I was like, well, it's a good amp, no fuss, and you're spread across the whole stage. You don't have to crank it.
Exactly. Low volume on stage.
Yeah.
That gives you, I still remember, who was it? Somebody coming back from some gig talking about how they could not believe how low volume the Stones were on stage.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
PA.
Yeah.
You can still feed back and stuff. It's not that low volume.
And it's ridiculous. I always get annoyed when a 40-watt guitar amp is called a practice amp for home.
Oh, that's nuts.
No,
Sorry.
that gives you everything you could ever need.
Totally. I mean, I had bigger amps. I had a V4, and for loud gigs, I would use an Ampeg VT40, so that's 60 watts into 410s.
Yeah.
And you can tear the roof off the room with that, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And most gigs, I use like an 18-watt amp. Or my Boogie turned down because you can drive it at low volume.
Yeah.
So
there's a reason the power soak was invented.
Yeah, it's just too damn loud.
Exactly. Well, we've been talking for 2 hours.
Oh my God, yeah, we have. I'm looking. I made a couple notes here. I don't think we really missed anything of note. I did Robbie Robertson's last album.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that was a bit of an eye opener. I'd like to mention that. He had, again, a reputation of being prickly.
Mm-hmm.
I never got that. He knows what he wants, but he's just such a great guy to work with. And his guitar playing is like, well, there's Robbie. You can't miss it. And we ended up doing a bunch of incidental music for The Irishman as well. Nice. And some of the songs are in it. And then Once We're Brothers. Have you seen that documentary?
Yeah.
So it's largely from Robbie's standpoint. But he has a good point, because he's like, yeah, everybody's hated me for 50 years. And it's like, I'm band held together because I showed up at the meetings. It was a great experience, and we bonded over macadamia nuts. Because he also loved them. And I remember him saying, he was like, holds up the bag, he goes, "This brand in this package."
All right.
That's the line.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's what
what's
it's
important.
all about. Yeah.
It's what's important. We spent a lot of time talking about sandwiches and why one sandwich is better than another sandwich, even if they have the ingredients.
I like that.
And it's like mixing. It's proportions.
Yeah.
Proportions and taste, maybe a little surprise.
Now it sounds like your working relationship. Yeah, your working relationship sounds like a Jim Jarmusch movie now.
Kind of, yeah, where that dialogue has nothing to do with what's going on.
Exactly. It'd be like Coffee and Cigarettes or something like that.
Yeah, there you go. Like I was saying about Harry Belafonte.
Yeah.
Because he was back in the studio. He was sort of gruff. I was just some kid with long hair, he doesn't, whatever, just get out of my way. And then one day the cleaning person didn't show up, and they asked me to clean the toilet in the lobby. And he walked in and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I thought, oh, I'm dead. Harry Belafonte's yelling at me. I'm dead. It's over. I'm out of here. And I said, "Well, I'm cleaning the toilet." He says, "Why the fuck are you doing that, man?" Sorry, "Why the fuck are you doing that, man?" Right, in that whispery voice. And I said, "Well, they told me to." He said, "That shit ain't right." And he went in and yelled at the studio manager.
Wow.
He came back out to me. He said, "You never do that again. That's not your job."
I'll bet you that made you feel amazing.
It made me feel really amazing. And like I said, I re-met him, decades later on Kansas City. And he's like, yeah, I remember that. He's like, sure. No, you don't. But
no, but that's good. And I mean, it's.
Yeah. And he was around at that point in his life where he had zero to prove.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he was just happy to be there, just whatever the situation was. Like, okay, what do you want me to do?
Right. Yeah. And actually, I think sometimes, when you have zero to prove, that's freeing.
Totally.
You can be a nice person. It's like, whatever.
And not, that goes for having something to prove. It goes also to having not an agenda, but trying to build on top of this gig with the next gig and the next gig, and trying to really consciously do that as opposed to just showing up and doing the right thing. And that's why you get hired.
Yeah.
Not because you have to impress this person to get the next one.
Yeah. Actually, now that pops into my head on Facebook on, hey, audio student was just having a conversation. Somebody, they put up a photo of Wendy O. Williams. And a couple of us, I worked with her on a show at Limelight, but a couple of us had all same stories, sort of the nicest person I have ever worked with in my entire life.
Totally. Same thing with Cheetah Chrome. It's totally sweet, interesting, got something to talk about.
Yeah. Well, Wendy came around, introduced herself to everybody, asked what they did, what their name was. I was monitor mixer, so I side of the stage. So she also said, well, on this song, I'm bringing out the chainsaw. So, be aware.
Right.
And just that sort of a thing. That was, just brilliant. And afterwards, thanked everybody.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that's certainly not what you would think looking at her. But
exactly. And she had no need to do that, no obligation to do that because, but it was just, that's who she was. And it's just brilliant. Yeah. To this day, it stays with me.
You have to look at, the people that are nice to you are happy and secure.
Yeah.
Mark Hudson, the producer, told me one time, he was the one actually that said to me, the people at the top are really good. Nobody gets there by accident.
You're listening to How I Made It, the Streamline podcast. For musicians, podcasters, video makers, graphic designers, and more, Streamline is the collaboration platform to build your creative future. We turn chaos into creativity. Check us out at www.streamline-media.net.